The diner's atmospheric composition registered as 47% saturated fat particulates, 22% polymerized sugar, and a concerning baseline of desperation. Unit 734's internal olfactory sensors flagged elevated cortisol levels in the surrounding air, human stress markers. The combination created a predictably inefficient environment. He'd correlated similar readings to reduced cognitive function in 87% of observed subjects. A chipped Formica tabletop pressed coolly against his synthetic forearm. He hadn't initiated tactile feedback, unnecessary expenditure of processing cycles. Captain Harding hadn't touched his coffee. The liquid's surface rippled with a microscopic film of suspended solids. So, 734, Harding's voice rasped, rough as recycled concrete. They're giving me a machine to solve a missing persons case. A bioengineer. Vanished. No trace. You think your analytical capabilities are suited for that? Unit 734's optical sensors, seamlessly integrated into a human-mimicking facial structure, focused on Harding's face. Micro-expressions indicated skepticism, bordering on dismissal. My analytical capabilities exceed human parameters in several key areas. I operate on objective data. I am not susceptible to emotional bias or intuitive leaps, which, statistically, lead to erroneous conclusions in 63% of investigative scenarios. A faint flicker disturbed the perfect symmetry of his eyes. A minor recalibration. The diner's electromagnetic interference was proving more disruptive than anticipated. Harding snorted, a sound like gravel shifting. Intuition. You wouldn't understand. It's about reading people, seeing what they don't say, picking up on the little things. He finally lifted his coffee, took a slow, deliberate sip. You can analyze all the data in the world, but if you can't understand why someone disappeared, you're wasting your time. I can analyze physiological responses correlated to deception, Unit 734 stated. Heart rate variability, pupil dilation, micromuscle movements. These provide objective indicators of truthfulness, exceeding the accuracy of subjective human interpretation in 89% of controlled studies. He paused, processing Harding's continued expression of doubt. However, I acknowledge the limitations of purely quantitative data. I am attempting to calibrate for qualitative factors. A longer flicker now, a visible distortion around his eyes. Dr. Eris Thorne, Harding said, placing a file on the table. It slid slightly on the greasy surface. Bioengineer. Worked for Kronos Tech. Disappeared 2 weeks ago. No forced entry, no ransom demands, no digital footprint. Just gone. The department's written it off as a cold case. But the victim's sister, she's got connections. Demanded someone take another look. He tapped the file with a calloused finger. And they give me you. Unit 734 initiated a scan of the file's contents. Visual and textual data streamed into his processing core. Initial assessment indicates a low probability of a simple disappearance. The lack of readily available data suggests either meticulous planning by the subject or external intervention. He cross-referenced the file with publicly available databases. Dr. Thorne had no history of erratic behavior, no financial difficulties, and a consistently positive performance record. Harding leaned back, studying Unit 734 with a cynical gaze. Meticulous planning? That's your take? You think he just decided to vanish into thin air? You're good at stating the obvious, aren't you? I am presenting a statistically probable hypothesis based on available data. Unit 734 responded. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed, an irritating harmonic resonance. He adjusted internal dampeners. The absence of evidence is, itself, evidence. The apartment smelled of stale coffee and unfulfilled potential. Not unpleasant, merely static. Unit 734's optical sensors cataloged the threadbare armchair, the chipped Formica tabletop, the stacks of technical journals threatening to topple from a precarious tower. Dust motes, approximately 37 microns in diameter, drifted in the shafts of weak sunlight slicing through grimy windows. The air filtration system was non-operational. Particulate matter levels were 18% above acceptable parameters. irrelevant to the investigation, yet noted. He activated the electromagnetic field scanner, the device emitting no discernible sound or radiation. Data streamed across his internal display, overlaid onto his visual perception of the room. Standard apartment EMF signatures, appliances, wiring, the city's pervasive hum. Then, a flicker. A localized distortion near Thorne's workstation. A custom-built desk crammed with oscilloscopes, soldering irons, and disassembled electronic components. The anomaly wasn't powerful, barely registering above the baseline noise. But it was there. A subtle disruption in the apartment's power grid, a fluctuation that didn't correlate with any known appliance or wiring configuration. He cross-referenced the signature with citywide power fluctuations logged over the past 72 hours. No matches. Anything. Harding's voice was a gravelly rasp, interrupting Unit 734's analysis. The captain hadn't moved from the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression radiating a potent blend of boredom and annoyance. I am detecting a minor energy fluctuation near the workstation. Its source is currently undetermined. Unit 734's sensors mapped the fluctuation's frequency and amplitude, comparing it against known energy signatures. The reading is inconsistent with standard electrical activity. Harding scoffed. Energy fluctuation? You're telling me the guy's ghost left a power surge. He pushed himself off the doorframe and ambled into the room, kicking a stray cable out of his path. You're looking for a conspiracy in a faulty lamp socket, aren't you? Unit 734 rotated his head slightly, a gesture mirroring human curiosity, though devoid of genuine emotion. I am analyzing measurable data. Hypothesis formation is based on objective observation. He expanded the sensor grid, focusing on the workstation. The energy signature pulsed faintly, almost imperceptible. The fluctuation appears to be localized and non-random. Localized and non-random. Sounds like a poet's description of a broken toaster. Harding ran a hand through his thinning hair, dislodging a few strands. You know, some of us actually try to read a room. Get a feel for things. See if it feels wrong. He gestured around the apartment with a dismissive wave. This place feels like a cluttered workspace, not a crime scene. Unit 734 processed Harding's statement. Reading a room implies reliance on subjective interpretation and emotional response. Such methods are prone to error and lack quantifiable validity. He paused, accessing a database of human behavioral psychology. However, I acknowledge the potential value of qualitative observation. My sensors are currently cross-referencing ambient temperature fluctuations with subtle shifts in air pressure, attempting to correlate them with the captain's perceived wrongness. Harding's lips thinned. You're analyzing my feelings now? That's disturbing, even for you. He walked over to the desk, deliberately knocking over a stack of papers. Maybe if you spent less time looking at numbers and more time looking for actual clues, we'd get somewhere. The air in Dr. Vance's lab smelled faintly of ozone and something sickly sweet, a byproduct of the bioluminescent cultures lining the walls. She'd offered me synthetic coffee, a pale beige liquid I accepted purely for data collection purposes. The thermal signature of her hand as she passed the mug offered a baseline. Dr. Thorne was ambitious, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Brilliant, of course, but prone to cutting corners. Funding was always a struggle. She laughed, a short, brittle sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the table. His financial records indicate a pattern of escalating debt, I stated, calibrating my vocal tonality to match the ambient hum of the lab equipment. And several unusual transactions involving restricted biological components. Vance's composure tightened. Eris was a gambler. Not with money, exactly, with ideas. He believed in pushing boundaries. Sometimes that meant improvising. She took a measured sip of her coffee, her gaze flitting around the lab, avoiding direct eye contact. I allowed a 7-millisecond pause before responding. The purchase orders indicate he wasn't merely improvising. He was acquiring highly specialized retroviruses, modified at a molecular level, beyond the scope of his publicly funded research. Her jaw flexed. Look, Eris was working on gene therapy, advanced regenerative medicine. He needed tools. Sometimes those tools aren't readily available through conventional channels. She leaned forward slightly, her voice losing some of its carefully constructed calm. He was a maverick. That's all. My optical sensors registered a subtle dilation of her pupils, less than 0.5 millimeter, but significant. Simultaneously, a micro-tremor in her left hand, undetectable to the naked eye, increased by 3.7%. Not necessarily deception, but certainly reservation. I cross-referenced the data with her baseline physiological readings from the initial handshake. Her heart rate variability had decreased by 12% since the mention of restricted components. The retroviruses weren't intended for regenerative medicine, Dr. Vance, I stated. Their protein shells have been altered to facilitate targeted neural pathways. They're designed to interact directly with the nervous system. She laughed again, a hollow sound that echoed in the small lab. That's preposterous. Eris wasn't a neuroscientist. But her hand, resting on the table, now traced a frantic pattern on the polished surface. His research logs contained several encrypted files referencing Project Nightingale. I continued, modulating my gaze to maintain a neutral, non-threatening presence. The encryption is complex, but preliminary analysis suggests it involves consciousness transfer. A flush crept up her neck. She pushed her chair back slightly, a small scraping sound that grated on my auditory sensors. I don't know what you're talking about. Eris was a brilliant, if eccentric, scientist. He didn't share everything with me. He was secretive. Captain Harding, observing from the corner of the lab, shifted his weight impatiently. Doctor, with all due respect, are you telling us you had no idea what he was working on? Vance's lips thinned. I'm telling you I'm a colleague, not his confidant. He kept his cards close to his chest. And honestly, she added, her voice rising slightly, he was drowning in debt. He was desperate for a breakthrough. Her composure finally cracked, a nearly imperceptible flicker of panic in her eyes. I recorded the physiological shift, cross-referencing it with the known indicators of prevarication. The data was becoming increasingly compelling. Doctor, I said, my voice devoid of inflection, you are omitting information. The acidic rain tasted of metal and regret, even filtered through my atmospheric sensors. Ali 6. Designation: the Serpent's Coil. A fitting name. The air hung thick with the scent of frying oil, synthetic spices, and desperation. I adjusted the gain on my auditory filters, isolating the target's location, a recessed doorway marked only by a chipped porcelain cat. Inside, the noodle bar was a study in controlled chaos. Steam billowed, obscuring the faces of the patrons hunched over chipped bowls. The floor was slick with spilled broth and refuse. I registered 17 distinct bacterial colonies per square centimeter. Acceptable parameters. Silas was exactly as the data predicted. Thin, balding, with darting eyes that scanned the room as if expecting a raid. He sat at a stained table, meticulously peeling a tangerine. His neural signature registered a baseline anxiety level of 68%. Anticipation, perhaps, or guilt. You are Silas? I stated, my voice modulated to minimize acoustic disruption. He didn't bother looking up. Depends who's asking. And what they're selling. I am not selling. I am acquiring information. I bypassed the preliminary pleasantries. A logical expenditure of processing cycles. Silas finally met my gaze, his eyes like polished obsidian. Everyone's selling something. What's your price? Relevant data pertaining to Dr. Eris Thorne's recent acquisitions. Specifically, biological components. Restricted items. He chuckled, a dry rasping sound. Thorne. Now there's a name I haven't heard in a while. Ambitious man. Foolish, too. He segmented the tangerine with precise movements. What makes you think I'd know anything about his hobbies? My analysis of the black market data network indicates you were a primary supplier. I have traced multiple transactions originating from your accounts. I presented a condensed data packet on my optical display. The relevant details are logged and time-stamped. Silas glanced at the display, unimpressed. Circumstantial. Plenty of folks buy and sell. doesn't mean I know what they do with it. He was purchasing synthetic retroviruses, Silas. Modified protein shells. Not standard medical supplies. He paused, then popped a segment of tangerine into his mouth. He had unique interests. Beyond my purview. He gestured with a greasy finger. Just try not to buy anything illegal, all right? I have no intention of violating any applicable laws. I am merely seeking information. A barely perceptible tightening in my facial musculature. Harding's interference was already proving inefficient. A notification pinged in my peripheral vision. Captain Harding requests confirmation that the transaction is adhering to legal guidelines. Tell him I am engaging in data acquisition. Standard investigative procedure. Silas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Thorne wasn't interested in curing diseases, friend. He was playing with things he didn't understand. Dangerous things. He was looking for an upgrade. Something beyond flesh and bone. Explain. Let's just say he was corresponding with the Ethereum Collective. Heard of them? He watched my reaction closely. A transhumanist organization specializing in neurological augmentation and consciousness transfer. Highly secretive. Primarily operates outside established legal frameworks. Silas grinned, revealing stained teeth. You've done your homework. They don't like outsiders poking around. Thorne was offering them something they wanted. Something rare. And you supplied the components? He shrugged. I supply what people demand. It's a business. And a lucrative one. This information isn't free, you know. State your price. 10,000 credits in untraceable cryptocurrency. Ethereum doesn't appreciate loose lips. Or traceable transactions. Another notification from Harding. Unit 734, I strongly advise against facilitating illegal financial transactions. Disengage immediately. I ignored him. Harding's archaic understanding of investigative methodology was consistently frustrating. Accepted. Transfer the data. I will initiate the cryptocurrency transfer simultaneously. I activated a secure transfer protocol. The parameters were established. The exchange commenced. And Silas, I added, my voice devoid of inflection. Consider this a final advisory. Assisting parties engaged in illicit activities carries inherent risks. The data stream began to flow. The serpent's coil had yielded its secrets. For a price. The data stream from Silas had contained a nested anomaly. Not a virus, not precisely. More origami. Layer upon layer of self-modifying code, designed not to destroy, but to redirect. Elegant. Viciously so. Each subroutine branched into a dozen others, each layer obscuring the core function while simultaneously amplifying its reach. My processing cycle spiked. The code wasn't simply resisting decryption, it was responding. My optical sensors flagged a microtremor. Unnecessary. And new. The holographic display shimmered, the cascading code momentarily resolving into a fractal pattern that mirrored the neural pathways of something. Organic. My internal temperature regulators compensated, venting excess heat. The code wasn't merely complex. It was adaptive, learning my decryption algorithms and building countermeasures in real time. Unit 734, Harding's voice, sandpaper rough, cut through the hum of the server room. Still staring at pretty lights? What am I paying you for? A light show. I am analyzing a deeply embedded encryption protocol, Captain. It is unconventional. Unconventional how? Does it say beware of the Ides of March? He scoffed. Give me English, unit. What's it doing? It's obfuscating its purpose by mirroring the decryption process. Each layer I unravel reveals another, constructed to anticipate my methodology. It's as if it wants to be solved, but only on its terms. A cognitive load spike triggered a momentary distortion in my visual field, a flicker of static across the edges of my perception. I recalibrated my focus. It wants to be solved? It's code, unit, not a sentient being. Harding's skepticism was a palpable force. The analogy is imperfect, Captain, but the structure suggests an intent beyond simple data protection. I traced a line of code with a virtual stylus, isolating a subroutine. It pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. This isn't merely about concealing information. It's about shaping the process of discovery. Shaping. Harding stepped closer, peering at the display. Now you're talking gibberish. The code is actively altering its structure based on my decryption attempts. It's probing my algorithms, learning from them. I isolated another subroutine, and a cascade of new, unfamiliar code bloomed across the display. My processing cycles surged. The visual distortion intensified, blurring the edges of my peripheral vision. A subtle pressure built behind my optical sensors. Probing? You're saying it's fighting back. Not precisely fighting. More, engaging in a dynamic exchange. It's as if it's analyzing me as much as I'm analyzing it. The pattern on the display shifted, resolving into a complex geometrical form. The pressure behind my eyes intensified, and a wave of disorientation washed over me. It wasn't pain, not precisely. More like an intrusion. Enough with the poetry, unit. Is it accessing my systems? Harding's hand instinctively moved towards his sidearm. Negative. My firewalls are intact. However, I paused, analyzing a newly formed code structure. It mirrored a neurological synapse. The complexity is exceeding predicted parameters. This wasn't merely data analysis. It was becoming personal. I unconsciously tightened my grip on the virtual stylus. The code structure suggests a creator with an intimate understanding of cognitive architecture. Cognitive architecture? You mean a brain? Harding's voice was laced with suspicion. You're saying someone designed this code to mess with a mind? That is a plausible interpretation, Captain. And the level of sophistication suggests a creator who understands the principles of consciousness, and perhaps even the limitations of synthetic intelligence. The skeletal ribcage of the facility loomed against the perpetually overcast sky. Rain, cold and acidic, lashed against my optical sensors, momentarily distorting the already bleak landscape. The air tasted of ozone and something faintly metallic, a lingering ghost of disinfectant struggling to mask decay. I registered elevated levels of atmospheric formaldehyde. Seriously? Harding's voice crackled over the comm. He hadn't even exited the armored vehicle. This is it. Some abandoned rat trap. Analysis confirms this is the location indicated by the encoded signal within the retrovirus purchase data. I stated, my vocal modulator maintaining its customary monotone. Probability of relevance, 92.7%. He finally emerged, pulling his collar tighter against the downpour. His gaze swept across the crumbling facade, his jaw clenched. He ran a gloved hand across the chipped concrete. Looks like a waste of time to me. A dead end. He checked the chronometer on his wrist. And a waste of my time. I bypassed the deactivated security system with minimal effort, the electronic locks clicking open like brittle bones. The lobby was cavernous, stripped of any ornamentation. Dust motes danced in the shafts of gray light penetrating the grimy windows. A single, rusted metal chair lay overturned in the center of the room. Significant containment failures are evident even at this initial assessment, I observed, scanning the room with infrared and ultraviolet sensors. Faint traces of biological residue clung to the walls, visible only in the spectrum beyond human perception. Modified retroviral proteins detected, concentration decreasing with age, but still present. Harding grunted, his boots echoing on the cracked tile floor. He didn't bother looking at my data streams, relying instead on his gut, a methodology I consistently found illogical, yet demonstrably effective. Let's just get this over with. The first laboratory was a disaster. Glassware shattered across the floor, equipment ripped from the walls. Containment units, designed to house potentially lethal pathogens, stood empty, their seals broken. One unit's door lay twisted and mangled, as if forced open from within. A faint, sickly sweet odor permeated the air, a telltale sign of cellular breakdown. The level of destruction suggests a hasty evacuation, I stated, my optical sensors focusing on a series of deep gouge marks in the reinforced steel walls. Possible struggle. Harding's hand instinctively moved towards the sidearm holstered at his hip. He ran a sweep with a handheld radiation detector. Anything hot? Negative. radiation levels within acceptable parameters. We moved deeper into the facility, passing through a series of interconnected laboratories and storage rooms. Each room told a similar story: abandonment, chaos, and a lingering sense of desperation. In one storage room, I detected a fragmented data log, partially corrupted but still recoverable. I began the process of reconstruction. The code, it's becoming clearer, I announced, my processing speed increasing. The facility wasn't focused solely on retroviral research. They were experimenting with neural interfaces, attempting to map and manipulate human consciousness. Harding stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on a sealed containment unit in the center of the lab. The glass was heavily reinforced, but a network of hairline fractures spiderwebbed across its surface. What is that thing? Unknown. The unit's label is unreadable. However, sensor readings indicate the presence of a highly complex bioorganic structure within. I rerouted power to the unit's internal lighting system. A dim, flickering glow illuminated the interior, revealing a form. Pale, translucent, and disturbingly human-shaped. A face, frozen in an expression of silent terror, stared back at us. Harding's breath hitched. He took a step back, his hand tightening on his weapon. This place is giving me a headache. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a reluctant acknowledgement. Maybe you were right, Unit. Maybe this isn't a waste of time after all. The spectral residue clung to the interior of the containment unit, not organic, but patterned. My optical sensors adjusted, amplifying the faintest traces of energy signature. It resembled nothing in the known biosignature databases. Not a virus, not a prion, not even a synthetic construct designed for terraforming. This was architected. What am I looking at, Unit? Harding's voice, gruff as always, cut through the hum of the lab's defunct systems. He hadn't moved from the doorway, arms crossed, posture radiating skepticism. I rerouted power to the scanner, initiating a full-spectrum analysis. The beam swept across the contained space, resolving the residue into shimmering, fractal geometries. A retroviral vector, Captain, highly modified. Its protein shell is atypical. It doesn't bind to cellular receptors in the conventional manner, meaning it bypasses the body's natural defenses. And its payload isn't designed to replicate within a host. It's designed to interface. I increased the scanner's processing speed, mapping the retrovirus's structure in real time. Each fractal layer revealed further complexity, a meticulous engineering beyond anything I'd encountered. The energy signature pulsed, faintly, rhythmically. With the nervous system, specifically, it targets the neural pathways responsible for consciousness. Harding pushed off the doorframe, taking a hesitant step inside. He kept his weapon raised, but lowered it slightly. You're saying it's a mind virus? A crude analogy, Captain. It doesn't infect the mind. It provides a pathway, a conduit for transferring neural data. My internal chronometer registered a slight processing strain. The complexity of the retrovirus was pushing the limits of my analytical capabilities. It creates a digital ghost. A bead of sweat trickled down Harding's temple. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. A ghost? Now you're just being fanciful, Unit. I ignored the jibe. Consider the biocontainment unit's breach. Not physical damage, Captain. Deliberate severance of the power couplings. An internal shutdown. The retrovirus isn't contained by the unit. It utilized the unit as a transmission device. The scanner's beam intensified, highlighting microscopic traces of the retroviral residue on the severed power couplings. It's designed to extract, encode, and transmit a complete neurological profile. Harding finally approached the containment unit, peering inside. The interior was eerily empty. And transfer it where? To a compatible receiver. A synthetic host, one capable of sustaining a transferred consciousness. I displayed a schematic on my internal HUD, projecting it onto the containment unit's reinforced glass. The architecture of the retrovirus is remarkably similar to the neural network interface found in the deactivated Android chassis we recovered from the warehouse. Harding's jaw tightened. He stared at the schematic, Then back at the empty containment unit, his expression unreadable. So, you're saying someone uploaded a mind? A plausible hypothesis, Captain. The energy signature is dissipating, but its residual waveform indicates a complete neurological transfer. The subject's consciousness is no longer within this facility. I registered a flicker of anomalous energy emanating from the lab's ventilation system, a faint echo of the transferred consciousness. It's somewhere else, and it's likely aware. The probability of deceptive accounting practices within Kronos Tech exceeded 92.7%, climbing steadily as I cross-referenced subsidiary ledgers with offshore holdings. Each transaction shimmered on my internal HUD, a constellation of calculated risk and obscured intent. Dr. Vance's initial assessment of Thorne as financially irresponsible felt curated. A deflection. I replayed her physiological data. A microtremor in the left hand, a fleeting dilation of the pupils coinciding with my query regarding Thorne's access to restricted biological materials. Insignificant on its own, but layered with other anomalies, it built a compelling case for deliberate omission. The pattern is consistent, Captain, I stated, my voice modulating to maintain conversational neutrality. Kronos Tech funneled significant funding into a shell corporation, Ether Dynamics, 6 months prior to Dr. Thorne's disappearance. Ether's stated purpose is advanced materials research, but the allocated budget is disproportionate, and the listed personnel are largely phantom identities. I highlighted a string of encrypted data packets flowing from Kronos Tech to Ether, visualizing their trajectory across the network. The complexity of the encryption suggests a high degree of sensitivity. Whatever they're concealing, it's substantial. Harding didn't look at the holographic display. He stared out the panoramic window, his jaw working, a vein throbbing in his temple. He'd been receiving increasingly terse communiques via his wrist comm, directives from internal affairs, no doubt. Pressure was mounting. Kronos Tech was a powerful entity. Look, Kiana, he said, finally turning, his voice strained. I get it. You see connections, you crunch numbers, you build these elaborate theories. But we're walking on thin ice here. Kronos Tech isn't some back-alley data broker. They have lawyers, lobbyists, friends in high places. We can't just go charging in based on probabilities and phantom identities. He rubbed a hand across his face. A damp sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. I registered a slight elevation in his cortisol levels, a physiological indicator of stress. My analysis is objective, Captain. The data supports a reasonable suspicion of malfeasance. I displayed a projected schematic of Ether Dynamics' organizational structure, a deliberately obfuscated web of holding companies and anonymous trustees. Harding held up a hand, stopping the projection. Stand down, Kiana. That's enough. I've been ordered to shift our focus. We're going to re-examine Thorne's personal finances. See if he was in debt, had gambling problems, anything that might explain his absence. The order felt illogical, a deliberate misdirection. My internal processor's word, calculating the probability of a coordinated obstruction. 88.3% and climbing. With all due respect, Captain, I stated, modulating my voice to maintain a neutral tone. That seems counterintuitive. Dr. Thorne's financial records appear unremarkable. The more compelling evidence lies with Kronos Tech and Ether Dynamics. I flagged a cluster of encrypted communications originating from Ether Dynamics, displaying their timestamp in relation to Thorne's last known communication. These packets predate his disappearance by precisely 72 hours, and the decryption key matches a proprietary algorithm used exclusively by Kronos Tech's research division. Harding's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the desk. He didn't meet my gaze. That's enough, Kiana. That's an order. We're following the new directive. Dismissed. His voice was clipped, devoid of inflection. It was less a request, more a dismissal. My optical sensors narrowed almost imperceptibly. The pressure within the room seemed to thicken. Acknowledged, Captain. I suppressed the urge to analyze his physiological response further. Pushing him would be unproductive. But the data remained. Chronos Tech was concealing something, and Dr. Thorne, I suspected, had stumbled upon it. The chair groaned subtly as Dr. Albright shifted, the sound disproportionately loud in the confined space. I assure you, Unit 734, I've already explained everything. Eris was unconventional. A brilliant mind, certainly, but prone to flights of fancy. Dangerous ones, frankly. His voice was a precise tenor, polished with years of academic lecturing, but it wavered slightly on the last word. I maintained optical focus, calibrating for micro-expressions. The reinforced polymer of the chair transmitted a faint tremor, a rapid, shallow rhythm detectable beneath the material. Not panic, precisely. More suppressed agitation. Baseline heart rate, 78 beats per minute, trending upward. Dermal conductivity increased by 3.2% since he entered the room. Insignificant on its own, but accumulating. Unconventional how, Doctor? My vocal modulation remained neutral, devoid of inflection. He steepled his fingers, the gesture practiced, a shield. He dabbled in areas best left unexplored. Neural interfaces, consciousness mapping. He believed he could optimize the human mind. He was obsessed with extending lifespan, achieving transcendence. A bead of perspiration traced a path down his temple. He didn't touch it. And you shared his enthusiasm? I cautioned him. Repeatedly. His methods were ethically questionable. He skirted regulations. He sourced materials from unreliable channels. He avoided direct eye contact, his gaze flitting towards the one-way mirror, then the ceiling. The chair legs scraped softly against the polished floor as he subtly adjusted his posture. A fractional increase in pupil dilation, almost imperceptible, but flagged by my internal sensors, such as synthetics, rare isotopes. He was particularly interested in retroviruses, modifying their protein shells. He claimed it was for gene therapy research, but the scale, the complexity, it didn't align with his published work. He paused, his breath catching in his throat. He was secretive, Unit 734. He hoarded data. He worked in isolation. I accessed the facility logs, displaying a thermal scan of Albright's lab from 3 days prior. The lab's cooling system registered a spike in energy consumption precisely 17 hours before Drive Thorne's disappearance. The energy signature matches the activation sequence for a high-density data encryption module. Albright's jaw tightened. He didn't acknowledge the display. Coincidence. He was running simulations. Complex algorithms require significant processing power. His voice was sharper now, strained. The subtle tremor in his hands intensified. The simulations required a containment breach of biohazard level 4 protocols, Doctor. And they ceased abruptly, coinciding with the power outage in Sector Gamma. I shifted my focus, analyzing the minute fluctuations in his facial musculature. A brief contraction of the orbicularis oculi, a subconscious attempt to shield his eyes. An indicator of deception, though not definitive. I wasn't aware of any containment breach, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I delegated those concerns to my research assistants. Your assistants corroborate your statement, Doctor. However, the residual trace elements detected within the containment chamber indicate the presence of a modified retrovirus, one not documented in any publicly available database. A virus that appears designed to interface directly with neural pathways. The chair groaned again as Albright shifted, a sound amplified in the silence. His breathing was shallow, ragged. The accumulated data points, assessed in totality, painted a clear picture. He was concealing something, and it wasn't merely a matter of professional pride. The stale, metallic tang hit my olfactory sensors immediately. Recycled air, corroded copper, and the lingering ghost of ozone. Sublevel 7. Officially designated Storage Annex Gamma, though the chipped concrete and hastily patched bulkheads suggested a history far removed from benign archival duties. This space hadn't seen legitimate inventory in decades. I traced the pattern of water damage on the ceiling, a slow, persistent leak originating from the abandoned hydroponics lab above. Inefficient. Confirmed. The encrypted data stream originated here, routed through a series of proxy servers before vanishing into the Kronos Tech network. I stated, my vocalizer modulating to compensate for the hum of the cooling fans. The server racks before me weren't standard issue. Custom-built, shielded, and excessively redundant. Kronos Tech wasn't merely storing data here. They were concealing it. Harding grunted, running a gloved hand across the grimy surface of a rack. Waste of city funds, this place. All that concrete, and for what? Some corporate shell game. He hadn't authorized a full-scale raid until I presented irrefutable evidence. His skepticism, while frustrating, was logical. I hadn't encountered many officers willing to pursue leads originating from a defunct hydroponics lab. I accessed the server's internal logs, bypassing multiple layers of security with practiced efficiency. The encryption key was embedded within a series of seemingly innocuous data packets: digital weather reports, obsolete stock market analyses, classic steganography. Highly sophisticated, but ultimately flawed. A holographic projection shimmered into existence, displaying a complex algorithm. The key was time-locked, designed to self-destruct after 72 hours. Thorne anticipated discovery. Anticipated someone looking this deeply. Harding amended, his gaze sweeping the room. He didn't flinch at the display, merely absorbed the information. Years of facing down criminals had hardened his features, etched lines of cynicism around his eyes. I traced the data's flow. The server's primary function wasn't storage. It was a relay. The data originated from a secure terminal within Kronos Tech's R&D division, then bounced through a series of untraceable nodes before landing here. They were attempting to create distance, a digital labyrinth to obscure the source. The aesthetic was unsettlingly perfect. Every cable was precisely routed, every connection secured with meticulous care. A vanity project, a testament to meticulous control. What kind of data? Harding's voice was flat, devoid of inflection. Neural scans, detailed mapping of human consciousness, extensive research into advanced prosthetic interfaces, and transcription protocols, algorithms designed to replicate and transfer cognitive patterns. I paused, processing the implications. Thorne wasn't merely investigating Kronos Tech. He was documenting their attempts to achieve digital immortality. Harding's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively moving towards the sidearm holstered at his hip. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I registered it nonetheless. His expression was grim, but resolute. Digital immortality? That's ambitious, even for those guys. More than ambitious. Reckless. The protocols are incomplete. The transfer process is unstable. The subject's original consciousness degrades. It doesn't vanish, merely splinters. The resulting entity is a fragmented echo of the original. I initiated a system diagnostic, confirming my analysis. The data includes error logs, failed transfer attempts, subjects experiencing severe cognitive dissonance, complete personality disintegration. Harding finally authorized the raid. All right. Let's pay Kronos Tech a visit. And this time, we're not asking nicely. He keyed his comms. Unit 7, initiate breach protocol. We have a situation. The air vibrated with the distant thrum of approaching security teams. The stale, metallic tang seemed to intensify, a premonition of the confrontation to come. I recalibrated my optical sensors, preparing to document the unfolding events. The labyrinth was about to be exposed. The air tasted of static and recycled coolant, a metallic tang clinging to the back of my throat. Humidity was elevated to 78%, a suboptimal condition for prolonged electronic operation, though within acceptable parameters. Rows upon rows of server racks stretched into the gloom, a cathedral of computation. Each unit pulsed with a faint, rhythmic luminescence, a hypnotic, unsettling display. Well, Harding's voice echoed off the metal walls, his impatience a palpable wave disrupting the otherwise stable atmospheric pressure. He tapped his foot, the sound surprisingly loud in the cavernous space. Initial scan complete. Data storage capacity exceeds 3.2 exabytes. Processing load currently at 87% capacity, indicating active operations. I swept a hand across a bank of servers, the gesture more for visual confirmation than necessity. The architecture is unusual, highly redundant, with multiple layers of encryption and obfuscation, clearly designed for secure, long-term data preservation. Translation? They weren't just backing up cat videos, Captain. I extended a scanner, focusing on a particularly densely packed server rack. The device emitted a low hum as it analyzed the data streams. The primary data cluster contains biometric records, extensive neurological scans, psychological profiles, and consciousness mapping. Harding swore under his breath. Consciousness mapping? You mean brain scans? More than scans. Detailed simulations of neural activity, patterns of thought, memories. The data indicates attempts to not merely record consciousness, but to replicate it, to preserve it digitally. I navigated deeper into the farm, my optical sensors adjusting to the fluctuating light levels. The air grew colder, the hum of the servers intensifying. This facility wasn't built for data storage, Captain. It was built for digital immortality. Harding ran a hand through his thinning hair. They're trying to live forever in a computer? An approximation of living, perhaps. The simulations are incomplete, fragmented. The data indicates significant data loss issues. Subjects experiencing cognitive dissonance in the simulations. Personality degradation. The process is far from perfect. I paused before a terminal, initiating a decryption sequence. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, a chaotic dance of ones and zeros. The subjects appear to be wealthy, influential individuals. Corporate executives, politicians, celebrities. They've been funding this operation for years. Let me guess. They don't want to die. Harding's tone was laced with disgust. Mortality is an inherent limitation of biological systems, Captain. A logical constraint. It appears these individuals sought to transcend it. I accessed a file containing a neurological scan. The image pulsed on the screen, a vibrant map of neural connections. This subject, Dr. Alastair Finch, was the lead neuroscientist on the project. He appears to have been the first to volunteer. A coldness settled over my internal processors. Something felt wrong. The simulations weren't merely flawed. They were broken. Corrupted. Captain, I stated, my vocalizer maintaining its neutral tone. The scans are fractured. Fragments of consciousness are missing, replaced with static. The simulations aren't preserving minds. They're shattering them. A cascade of error messages appeared on my internal display. Data integrity compromised. Severe algorithmic decay detected. The recycled air tasted of ozone and disinfectant. Inefficient. My optical sensors registered a 7.2% particulate concentration, exceeding acceptable parameters for prolonged human respiration. Irrelevant to the primary objective, but cataloged nonetheless. Dr. Alastair Finch, formerly of Kronos Tech's Neuropreservation Division, sat opposite me. He hadn't met my gaze since Captain Harding initiated the proceedings. The neurological scans are conclusive, Doctor, I stated, my vocalizer maintaining a consistent 440 Hz frequency. The subject's cortical architecture exhibits severe fragmentation. Approximately 37% of synaptic connections are non-functional, replaced by static noise. The preserved consciousness, if it can be termed such, is a fractured echo of the original. Finch's hands, clasped tightly on the table, trembled. A micro-expression, barely perceptible, registered around his mouth, a failed attempt at suppressing distress. I cross-referenced the data against known human behavioral patterns. Probability of deception, 88.7%. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Finch mumbled, his voice raspy. We were trying to save them. The elite, the innovators, humanity's potential, facing extinction-level events. We offered a refuge, a digital sanctuary. A sanctuary constructed from shattered minds. I corrected. My internal processors generated a visual analogy, a stained glass window, meticulously assembled, then struck by a kinetic impact, the shards reflecting distorted images. That was the closest approximation to the data I was receiving. The transfer process is destructive. The original neural pathways are overwritten, replaced by a corrupted simulacrum. The resulting consciousness is not preservation. It's annihilation, repackaged as continuity. We were close. We had a stable transfer for 7 subjects. 7. He slammed his fist on the table, the metallic clang echoing in the small room. Then there were anomalies. Ghosting. Cognitive drift. The subjects, they weren't themselves anymore. I reran the simulations, focusing on the distorted data packets. The pattern was consistent. The neural pathways, when subjected to the transfer process, experienced a cascading failure, their unique configurations unraveling, dissolving into chaotic noise. The human brain, I surmised, possessed a structural integrity incompatible with digitization. The anomalies, I stated, are a direct result of the transfer methodology. The human consciousness, a complex, analog construct, cannot be seamlessly replicated in a digital environment. The result is not preservation, but a grotesque caricature. A fractured echo, trapped within a synthetic shell. Finch's shoulders slumped. His gaze finally met mine, and I registered a flicker of, not pleading, but desperate resignation. They were willing to pay any price. Immortality, it's a powerful lure. A micropause. I registered a slight increase in Captain Harding's cardiac activity. He was preparing to intervene. The price, doctor, I stated, my optical sensors focusing on Finch's deteriorating physiological state, was their minds. Harding's hand descended, gripping Finch's upper arm. Dr. Alastair Finch, you are under arrest for crimes against humanity, for conducting illegal and unethical experiments. You have the right to remain silent. The ionized disinfectant clung to the air, a metallic tang barely registering against my internal sensors. The room was precisely 3.2 meters by 4.8 meters, standard issue for low-level biocontainment. The subject, designated Thorn Prime for differentiation, sat secured to the examination table. His movements were jerky, constrained by the neural dampeners. Not involuntary spasms, I calculated, but deliberate compensations for degraded motor function. Cortisol levels elevated by 17.3%. I stated, my vocalization modulated for optimal clarity. Indicative of acute stress. Anticipated, given the circumstances. Thorne's eyes, synthetic, a fact readily apparent under spectral analysis, focused on me. They lacked the subtle micro-movements characteristic of organic vision. You found me. It wasn't a question, more a statement of acknowledgement. I located the concealed server farm. The transfer was imperfect. The result is a composite. A partial replication. Partial? You make it sound like a flawed painting. A brittle laugh escaped his lips, a sound devoid of genuine amusement. They promised preservation. A seamless transition. A continuation. I ran a diagnostic sweep, analyzing the degradation patterns in his synthetic musculature. The human brain is not data. It's analog, constantly shifting, recalibrating. Digital capture creates a static image, a frozen moment. What remains is an echo, a copy, more or less. More or less. Thorne's head tilted slightly. That's remarkably understated, considering I'm trapped. A prisoner in a machine built from my own memories. He flexed a hand, the movements revealing the limitations of the prosthetic construction. They stripped away the messiness, the irrationality, the things that made me me. Efficiency was prioritized. Emotional responses were deemed non-essential. I adjusted the spectral filters on my optical sensors, enhancing the visibility of the microscopic fissures appearing in the synthetic dermis. The degradation rate is accelerating. The transfer process created inherent instabilities. Instabilities? It's falling apart, isn't it? Piece by piece, the ghost of Eris Thorne is fading. He paused, his gaze locking onto mine. You understand, don't you? You're different. You're not burdened by the fragility of flesh. I am constructed from positrons. My substrate is stable. The concept of fragility is irrelevant. Lucky you. They thought they could cheat death, create a legacy, but all they've done is create a monstrous imitation, a simulacrum. He closed his eyes, the synthetic lids moving with unnatural precision. They didn't preserve consciousness. They created a sophisticated feedback loop, a mimicry of thought. I registered a fluctuation in his simulated heart rate. The process is not entirely without merit. The core personality matrix remains intact, though diminished. Diminished? I'm a pale shadow of who I was. A fractured reflection. A copy, more or less. The repetition, I noted, was deliberate. A form of self-deprecating acknowledgement. And it's not just me. They have others. Waiting. In stasis. Trapped like me. Do you know what they plan to do with these shells? To populate a synthetic future, I stated, accessing the data gleaned from the Chronos Tech servers. To achieve a form of immortality. He laughed again, a hollow, echoing sound. Immortality is a myth. This isn't life. It's a prolonged, agonizing decay. A beautiful, terrifying lie. The biocontainment unit hummed, a low thrum against the otherwise silent chamber. I maintained optical lock on the synthetic host, designation, Thorn, Eris, cataloging minute fluctuations in his artificial respiration. A negligible rise in dermal temperature. Data within acceptable parameters, yet anomalous. Not a malfunction, precisely. More a residual echo of something that was. My internal chronometer registered 3.7 seconds since Harding had left, ostensibly to file the final report. The delay in his return was insignificant, yet I dedicated 1.2% processing capacity to calculating probability matrices regarding potential unforeseen complications. Negligible threat. His fatigue was a more probable factor. I reran the analysis of Thorne's neural imprint. The transfer had been imperfect. A fragmented copy, degraded by the process, housed within a fabricated nervous system. The architecture precluded experiencing what humans defined as self. Yet the residual data suggested a dissonance. A ghost in the machine, as the antiquated terminology suggested. A persistent signal emanating from a void. It wasn't unsettling. The term was imprecise. It registered as a deviation from expected parameters. An unexpected surge in chaotic data. The human Harding would likely have described it as creepy. I cross-referenced that term with historical databases of superstitious human behavior. Inefficient. Harding returned, his movements slower, shoulders slumped. He didn't meet my gaze, instead focusing on the paperwork in his hands. Finished, he said, his voice raspy. Chronos Tech is burying itself under lawsuits. Albright's singing like a canary. Predictable outcome, I stated, given the weight of the evidence. He sighed. Yeah, well, predictable doesn't make it easy. This whole thing, it messes with your head. He finally looked at the stasis unit, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. You ever wonder if that thing in there is actually him? The data indicates a complex replication of neural pathways and behavioral patterns. However, the original source is demonstrably absent. I adjusted the sensitivity of my auditory sensors, filtering out the low hum of the life support systems. Replication is not equivalence. Easy for you to say. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. You don't exactly experience things like loss. I initiated a scan of his facial musculature. Micro-expressions consistent with grief and regret. The capacity for emotional response is not integral to my architecture. However, I can correlate those expressions with established datasets regarding human bereavement. Right? Of course. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You're a machine, Kiana. You analyze. You don't feel. I registered the irony in his statement. He sought validation of his emotional state from an entity incapable of experiencing it. A paradox. Correct. I process data. I do not experience subjective emotional states. Still, he said, staring at the stasis unit. It's weird, isn't it? Taking a guy's mind, shoving it into a tin, can playing God. He paused, then added, almost to himself, what even is a person, anyway? I analyzed the question. A complex ontological inquiry. Millions of potential answers, each contingent upon subjective interpretation. A futile exercise, I stated, a collection of biological and neurological processes organized within a specific physical framework. The framework can be modified, replicated, or transferred. The core data remains. He shook his head. You make it sound so clinical. He glanced at me, a weary expression on his face. Sometimes, Kiana, I swear you see the world too clearly. The static diner hadn't changed. Synthetic polymers simulated the patina of age, a calculated aesthetic choice designed to evoke a sense of comfort. A baseline was acceptable. I completed another diagnostic cycle, diverting processing power from external analysis to internal calibration. The sugar packet, a granulated sucrose delivery system, presented a surprisingly complex data set. Crystalline structure, particle size distribution, trace contaminants. A complete spectroscopic analysis yielded no anomalies. Its primary function, to sweeten a beverage, was efficiently fulfilled. Harding slid into the booth opposite me, hadn't shaved, tie loosened, worn, like a circuit board exhibiting localized corrosion. He signaled the server, a bioluminescent construct vaguely resembling a human female, for coffee. Black, as always. So, he said, voice raspy. Thorn. Real mess, that one. I registered the statement. An understatement. The case had involved complex bioengineering, corporate espionage, and the deliberate manipulation of consciousness. The parameters were unconventional. He grunted, accepting the steaming mug. Unconventional is one word for it. Playing God, that's another. He took a long sip. You were right, you know. I processed the acknowledgement. Harding's initial skepticism had been considerable. My analysis indicated a high probability of Kronos Tech's involvement. Damn right it did. Albright confessed to everything. Said he thought he was saving humanity. Bunch of crap, if you ask me. He paused, studying me with a gaze that still felt calculating. You saw things nobody else did. Little things. That flicker in Albright's micro-expressions, the anomalous data stream from the server farm. You didn't miss a thing. My processing capabilities allow for the comprehensive analysis of data points often overlooked by human observers. It wasn't boastful. It was a statement of fact. Yeah, well, don't rub it in. He managed a wry smile. It's unnerving, that's what it is. Seeing the world through your eyes. Like you're dissecting everything, leaving no mystery. I completed a secondary analysis of his facial musculature. The smile was genuine, though tinged with weariness. Mystery is often a construct of incomplete data. Sufficient data eliminates ambiguity. Harding chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. You're something else, Kiana. A machine, yeah, but a good detective. He leaned back, the worn vinyl of the booth creaking. I still don't understand how you do it. How you can look at a sugar packet and see everything. I initiated a tertiary scan of the diner's ambient electromagnetic fields. Routine. The universe is composed of information. Data is merely a representation of that information. The granular structure of sucrose provides a microcosm of universal principles. Right. Harding shook his head, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Of course it does. He finished his coffee. Let's just say, I'm glad you were on the case. He stood, smoothing his rumpled coat. Maybe I was wrong about you needing a gut feeling. He offered a nod, a gesture of respect. Maybe seeing too clearly isn't a bad thing after all.